December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow blanketed the frozen landscape as the men of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion huddled around small fires, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The African-American soldiers had been deployed to support the 106th Infantry Division, positioned along what was considered a quiet sector of the Allied front. General Alfred Jodl of the German High Command had already signed the orders that would send 250 German troops surging toward these very positions, confident that the inferior American forces, especially the black units, would crumble at first contact. He could not have been more catastrophically wrong. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how racial prejudice blinded the Wehrmacht to the true capabilities of the black American soldiers they would face, and how that fatal miscalculation would contribute to one of Germany's most devastating defeats of the war, a defeat that would cost them not just battle position, but the lives of over 20,000 of their most experienced troops. Staff Sergeant William Thompson of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion checked his watch in the dim light of the command post. It was 400 hours, and something didn't feel right. At 29, Thompson was older than many of the men under his command, and his instincts had been sharpened by 18 months of combat experience since landing in Normandy. The 333rd, an all-black unit under the command of white officers, had proven itself repeatedly since D-Day, delivering precision artillery support that had saved countless American lives. "Artillery's the great equalizer," Thompson often told the new replacements. "Jerry doesn't care what color pulls the lanyard when shells start falling on his head." 5 miles away, Obersturmführer Klaus Weber of the SS Leibstandarte Division reviewed his attack orders one final time. At 22, Weber had already fought on the Eastern Front and in Italy. The intelligence briefing had emphasized that his sector would face minimal resistance, mostly support units, including Negro artillery battalions. "The American Army makes a grave mistake putting these half-apes in uniform," his commanding officer had said during the briefing. "They lack discipline and will run at the first shell. The propaganda about their fighting ability is just that, American propaganda." Weber nodded in agreement, having absorbed years of Reich racial ideology. The Reich's anthropologists had published extensive studies proving the genetic inferiority of black people, and Weber had never questioned these scientific facts. The thought of facing these supposedly inferior troops gave him confidence as 0 hour approached. In the American sector, Lieutenant Colonel Harmon McBride, the white commanding officer of the 333rd, was reviewing intelligence reports indicating increased German movement. A West Point graduate from Tennessee, McBride had initially requested transfer when assigned to command a black artillery battalion. Now, 18 months later, he would trust these men with his life. "Thompson," McBride called to the staff sergeant, "what do you make of these reports?" Thompson studied the papers. "Sir, it's more than routine patrol activity. The timing, the multiple sectors showing movement. I think they're positioning for something big." McBride nodded, having come to the same conclusion. "Alert the battery commanders. I want ammunition stockpiled at each position and range calculations double-checked for defensive fire missions." "Yes, sir," Thompson replied, heading out into the cold darkness. At the nearby 969th Field Artillery Battalion, another all-black unit, Master Sergeant James Wilson was conducting a pre-dawn inspection of their 155mm howitzers. The 969th had established an impressive record, earning a distinguished unit citation for their performance during earlier campaigns. Wilson took particular pride in their reputation for accuracy and rapid fire. Each of their gun crews could unleash 15 aimed rounds in under 5 minutes, a rate that had shocked German prisoners who had been on the receiving end. "These guns don't see color, and neither do the shells," Wilson often said. "They just see targets." At 0530 hours, the sky lit up as over 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire along an 80-mile front, marking the beginning of what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The barrage was unlike anything the American forces had experienced on the Western Front, reminiscent of the massive Soviet artillery preparations many German units had faced in the east. In the command post of the 333rd, the ground shook as shells impacted nearby. Colonel McBride grabbed the field telephone as reports flooded in. Battalion CP McBride speaking. "Sir, this is Captain Lewis at Baker Battery. We're taking heavy fire, but all guns are operational. Request permission to return fire." "Negative, Captain. Hold fire until we identify their main gun positions. We don't want to reveal our locations yet." Thompson watched the colonel's face, seeing the calculation behind his eyes. In artillery duels, patience often meant survival. Obersturmführer Weber led his company forward through the pre-dawn darkness, following closely behind the rolling artillery barrage. The plan called for a rapid penetration of the American lines, with armored spearheads pushing deep into the rear areas before significant resistance could be organized. Intelligence had indicated this sector was held primarily by inexperienced troops and support units. "Remember," Weber told his platoon leaders, "the Negro troops will run, push through them quickly, and concentrate on any white combat units that might offer real resistance." As the German infantry approached the American front lines, they found many positions abandoned or lightly defended, seeming to confirm their expectations. The initial wave of the offensive was proceeding exactly as planned. What Weber and the German High Command failed to understand was that the black artillery units they dismissed were among the most professional and well-trained in the entire U.S. Army. These men had overcome relentless discrimination, segregation, and dehumanization, not just from the enemy but often from within their own army, to become elite soldiers. The 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions had spent thousands of hours perfecting their craft. They had fired more practice rounds per gun than almost any other artillery units in the European theater. Being black in the segregated U.S. Army meant having to be twice as good to receive half the recognition, and these men had embraced that challenge. By 0700 hours, the full scale of the German offensive was becoming clear. Colonel McBride received orders to displace his battalion to new positions further west as the front line began to collapse. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, but the 333rd had trained extensively for retrograde operations. "Thompson, I need you to coordinate the withdrawal of Charlie Battery," McBride ordered. "Get them set up at grid reference Baker 89er to provide covering fire for the infantry withdrawal." "Yes, sir," Thompson replied, gathering his gear. As Thompson reached Charlie Battery's position, he found the men already preparing for movement, under the direction of Lieutenant Henry Chapman, one of the few black officers in the battalion. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," Chapman greeted him, "we've already plotted fire missions for the new position and packed all non-essential equipment." Thompson nodded approvingly. "Good work, Lieutenant. Battalion wants us operational at Baker 89er within the hour. We'll move in echelon 2 guns at a time, while the others maintain fire support." The battery executed the maneuver with precision born of endless drills, maintaining fire support throughout the displacement. Each howitzer crew worked with choreographed efficiency, setting up, acquiring targets, and delivering accurate fire within minutes of arriving at the new position. Meanwhile, the German advance continued to gain momentum. The 106th Infantry Division, caught unprepared by the scale and ferocity of the attack, was beginning to disintegrate. Thousands of American troops were surrendering as German armored columns bypassed strongpoints and pushed deep into Allied territory. Obersturmführer Weber's company had advanced nearly 7 miles by mid-morning, encountering only scattered resistance. His confidence grew with each passing hour. The American defense was collapsing exactly as predicted. "See how they run," he told his radioman as they watched a group of American supply troops retreating in disarray. The Führer was right about them. What Weber didn't realize was that while some frontline positions were collapsing, the black artillery units were executing a fighting withdrawal that would soon prove decisive. The 333rd and 969th were falling back not in panic, but according to doctrine, maintaining fire support throughout their movement to new defensive positions. By noon, the situation had become critical across the entire front. The German breakthrough threatened to split the American forces in half. At the new position of the 333rd, Colonel McBride received updated orders directly from the Corps headquarters. "Gentlemen," he addressed his staff. "Our mission has changed. We are now the rear guard. The 106th Division is attempting to establish a new defensive line 10 miles west of here. Our job is to slow the German advance long enough for that line to form." Staff Sergeant Thompson exchanged glances with the other NCOs. They all understood what rear guard meant. They would be the last to withdraw if they withdrew at all. "Sir," Thompson spoke up, "with your permission, I'd like to establish forward observer positions to improve our targeting." McBride nodded. "Approved. But I want communication lines doubled up. If we lose contact with our forward observers, we're firing blind." Thompson selected 3 teams, each consisting of an officer, a radio man, and 2 enlisted men for security. These teams would move forward to positions overlooking likely German approach routes, directing artillery fire with precision that would otherwise be impossible. One of these teams, led by Lieutenant James Robinson, established an observation post in the attic of an abandoned farmhouse with excellent views of the valley below. Robinson, a college-educated man from Philadelphia who had been denied officer training multiple times because of his race, before finally receiving his commission, was one of the battalion's best forward observers. "I can see vehicle movement along the main road," Robinson reported through the radio. "Looks like a reinforced company with half-tracks and at least 4 tanks. Grid coordinates. Able 3759er. Back at the battery position, the coordinates were quickly converted into firing data. Within seconds, the first shells were airborne, arcing toward the German column. Obersturmführer Weber was riding in the lead half-track when the first artillery shells landed. The initial rounds fell short, kicking up snow and earth 50 meters ahead of the column. Before he could order his vehicles to disperse, the next salvo landed directly on the road, destroying 2 half-tracks instantly. "Take cover," Weber shouted, diving into a roadside ditch as more shells rained down with unnerving accuracy. The precision of the American artillery fire was shocking. Each adjustment brought the shells closer to their targets, as if the American observers could see exactly where each round landed. Within minutes, 5 vehicles were burning, and the road was effectively blocked. "This isn't supposed to happen," Weber's radio man said, his voice betraying his confusion. "Intelligence said this sector was only defended by Negro units." Weber didn't respond, as he watched another shell land directly on a Panzer IV, setting it ablaze. The American artillery wasn't just accurate, it was devastating. The crews were firing with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. What the Germans were experiencing was the result of thousands of hours of training. The black artillerymen of the 333rd and 969th had devoted themselves to mastering their weapons systems, often working longer hours than white units to prove their worth. Many had been assigned to artillery because the army considered it a technical field where black soldiers could serve without directly engaging in combat alongside white troops, a reflection of the military's segregationist policies rather than any assessment of combat capability. This misguided policy had inadvertently created elite artillery formations. Men who might have excelled in infantry or armored units had instead become masters of ballistic mathematics, meteorological calculations, and fire coordination. Their guns were maintained with fanatical attention to detail, their firing tables memorized, their drills practiced until they could be performed in complete darkness. As the afternoon progressed, the German advance in the sector facing the 333rd and 969th began to slow. What had been a rapid exploitation was becoming a methodical advance, with German units forced to deploy reconnaissance elements to locate the American artillery positions that were wreaking havoc on their columns. At the observation post, Lieutenant Robinson continued to direct devastating fire missions. His team had already adjusted fire onto 3 different German formations, effectively channeling the enemy advance into predetermined killing zones. "New target," Robinson reported. "Infantry company in the open at Baker 4631. They're moving toward the ridgeline." The response came immediately. "Fire mission received. Battery firing HEFD. First round on the way." Robinson watched through his binoculars as the first high-explosive round detonated above the German infantry. The airburst showered the exposed troops with lethal fragments. The Germans scattered, seeking any available cover in the snow-covered landscape. "Target. Drop 50. Right 25. Robinson adjusted. Fire for effect. The next volley, all 6 howitzers firing simultaneously, landed with devastating accuracy. The German company disintegrated under the barrage, with survivors fleeing in disarray. Back at the German command post, reports of the unexpectedly fierce resistance were causing concern. What had been projected as a rapid penetration through minimal resistance had become a costly frontal assault. Standartenführer Joachim Peiper, commander of the most powerful Kampfgruppe in the offensive, reviewed the mounting reports of artillery damage to his advancing columns. His battle group, consisting of over 100 tanks and armored vehicles, was supposed to reach the Meuse River within 24 hours. Instead, they were being repeatedly delayed by surprisingly effective American resistance. "Who is providing this artillery support?" Peiper demanded. "Our intelligence indicated the Americans had only rear echelon units in this sector." "The prisoners report it's the 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions," his intelligence officer replied. "They're Negro units, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Peiper snapped. "But they're not running, sir. They're conducting a textbook delay operation." Peiper studied the map, recalculating his timetable. The delay was threatening the entire operational plan, which depended on reaching the Meuse before the Allies could react with strategic reserves. Every hour lost increased the chance of failure. "Divert the 12th SS to eliminate these artillery positions," Peiper ordered. "We cannot allow Negro artillery to disrupt the Führer's offensive." The decision to allocate combat power to eliminate the black artillery units represented a fundamental shift in German assessment. Units that had been dismissed as inconsequential were now being recognized as a serious threat, requiring dedicated counter-battery efforts. As dusk approached, Staff Sergeant Thompson moved between gun positions of the 333rd, checking on his men and ensuring ammunition was being properly managed. The battalion had fired over 2,000 rounds since morning, and resupply was becoming a concern, as the German advance had cut some of their supply routes. "How are the men holding up, Sergeant Jackson?" Thompson asked the section chief of Gun 4. Sergeant Robert Jackson, a former sharecropper from Mississippi, wiped sweat from his brow despite the freezing temperature. "They're tired, Sarge, but they'll keep going as long as needed. Nobody's talking about pulling back." Thompson nodded. "Ammunition status?" "We're down to 37 rounds of HE and 21 of white phosphorus," Jackson reported. "Been rationing since noon." "Division promised a resupply convoy after dark," Thompson replied. "Make those rounds count until then." The men of the 333rd took pride in their efficiency. While the average artillery battery might need 8 or 9 rounds to effectively target an enemy position, the 333rd typically required only 3 or 4, the initial round plus 2 or 3 adjustments. This economy of ammunition was now proving crucial as supplies dwindled. At the forward observation post, Lieutenant Robinson's team spotted a new German formation approaching, a full battalion of mechanized infantry with tank support moving deliberately toward the American positions. "This is Hawkeye 1-3, Robinson radioed urgently. "Large enemy formation at grid Charlie 6924. Request immediate battery fire priority target." Colonel McBride himself responded to this call. "Hawkeye 1-3, this is Thunderhead Actual. Battery fire authorized, all guns maximum rate." The 6 150mm howitzers of the 333rd fired at their maximum sustained rate, nearly 3 rounds per minute per gun. The effect on the German formation was catastrophic. The tightly packed vehicles made perfect targets in the fading light, their positions revealed by headlights they had switched on as darkness approached. Obersturmführer Weber had joined this larger formation after his company's advance had been halted earlier in the day. As shells began falling around the column, he experienced a moment of déjà vu. The same precision, the same devastating effect. "It's them again," he said to his company commander. "The same artillery unit from this morning." The company commander, a veteran of the Eastern Front, shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen such accurate, indirect fire, not even from the Russians. How can these Negroes fight this way? It contradicts everything we've been told." Weber had no answer. The reality before him was dismantling a lifetime of indoctrination about racial hierarchy. The men firing those artillery pieces, men he had been taught to consider subhuman, were demonstrating skill and courage that matched or exceeded anything he had witnessed from racially superior German units. As night fell across the battlefield, the German offensive continued to press forward in many sectors, creating the bulge in the American lines that would give the battle its name. Yet in the areas facing the 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions, the advance had been significantly slowed, buying precious time for American reinforcements to arrive. Colonel McBride gathered his officers for a status update as darkness provided temporary respite from direct observation. "Gentlemen, 8 Corps Headquarters has ordered us to hold this position through the night," McBride informed them. "The 101st Airborne is being trucked to Bastogne, and our fire support is critical to keeping the roads open for their movement." Lieutenant Chapman raised his hand. "Sir, what about ammunition resupply? Baker Battery is down to 20 rounds per gun." "Supply trucks are en route," McBride replied, though his tone suggested uncertainty. "But we need to prepare for the possibility they won't get through. Lieutenant Robinson's observation team reports the Germans are moving to encircle our position." Staff Sergeant Thompson spoke up. "Sir, request permission to take a detail back along the supply route. We might be able to salvage ammunition from abandoned positions." McBride considered the request. It was dangerous. The area between their current position and the original line was now contested territory, with German reconnaissance units operating freely, but without ammunition, their guns would fall silent. "Permission granted, Thompson. Take 2 jeeps and whatever men you need, but be back before dawn." Thompson selected 7 men for the mission, including Sergeant Jackson and Corporal Davis, both experienced NCOs who had served with the battalion since its formation. As they prepared to depart, Thompson briefed them on the risks. "We're looking for any artillery ammunition compatible with our howitzers," he explained. "The 106th Division had several artillery battalions that were overrun. If they followed proper procedures, they would have disabled their guns, but might have left ammunition behind rather than destroying it." The men nodded, understanding the desperate nature of their mission. Each loaded a Thompson submachine gun or M1 carbine, weapons not typically carried by artillerymen, but essential for the task ahead. As Thompson's detail departed, moving carefully through the darkness with blackout lights, the men of the 333rd and 969th continued their work. Fire missions were calculated based on map coordinates rather than direct observation, targeting road junctions and likely assembly areas to disrupt German movements throughout the night. The psychological impact of this continuous fire was significant. German troops, expecting to advance rapidly through minimal resistance, instead found themselves under constant artillery threat, even in darkness. The precision of daylight fire had created an impression of omniscient observers, making every soldier wonder if the next shell had his name on it. At the German headquarters, Standartenführer Peiper reviewed the disappointing progress reports. His battle group, which should have advanced over 40 kilometers by nightfall, had covered less than 25. The delay threatened the entire operational timeline of the offensive. "The Negro artillery units have been reinforced," his intelligence officer reported. "Prisoners claim they're operating at least 12 heavy guns, possibly more." The reality was quite different. Between them, the 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions had only 11 operational howitzers, the others having been lost during the withdrawal or disabled due to mechanical failures. But their fire discipline and coordination created the impression of a much larger force. "What about our counter-battery efforts?" Peiper demanded. "Inconclusive, sir. They're employing excellent fire discipline. Minimum rounds per mission, frequent position changes. Our sound-ranging teams can't get a fix on their locations." This professional assessment stood in stark contrast to the pre-battle intelligence that had dismissed black units as undisciplined and ineffective. The reality of combat was dismantling racial theories with each expertly delivered shell. Staff Sergeant Thompson's detail moved cautiously through the contested terrain, avoiding roads and using terrain features for concealment. They had already located one abandoned American artillery position, salvaging 38 rounds of 150mm ammunition when they heard vehicle movements ahead. "Take cover," Thompson whispered, directing his men into a shallow drainage ditch beside the forest trail they had been following. A German half-track rolled past, its commander standing in the open hatch, scanning the surroundings. Behind it came two Kübelwagens, the German equivalent of the American Jeep, carrying infantry. Thompson and his men remained motionless until the vehicles had passed. That was close. Corporal Davis breathed once the sound of engines had faded. Too close. They're everywhere, Thompson replied. Let's get this ammunition back to the battalion. We'll have to try for more tomorrow night if we're still here. The men loaded the precious shells onto their jeeps and began the careful journey back to their unit's position. The 38 rounds they had recovered might mean the difference between holding their position and being overrun. As dawn approached on December 17th, the men of the 333rd and 969th prepared for what they knew would be a challenging day. The German offensive was gaining momentum across the broader front, with American units being pushed back or surrounded throughout the Ardennes. Their position, once part of a coherent defensive line, was becoming an isolated outpost as adjacent units withdrew. Colonel McBride received updated orders as first light broke across the snow-covered landscape. The commanding general of Theater Corps had designated their position as critical terrain to be held at all costs, to protect the southern approach to Bastogne, a vital road junction that was becoming the focal point of the American defense. "We're on our own, gentlemen," McBride told his officers after reading the orders. "The nearest friendly infantry is 5 miles west. We've been designated as a sacrifice position to buy time for the defense of Bastogne." The officers exchanged glances, understanding the implications. A sacrifice position was exactly what it sounded like, a unit expected to fight until overrun, buying time with their lives. Staff Sergeant Thompson studied the faces of the men around him as Colonel McBride's words sank in. There was no panic, no outrage at being designated a sacrifice, just the quiet determination that had become characteristic of the unit. "Questions?" McBride asked, looking around the group of officers and senior NCOs. Lieutenant Chapman raised his hand. "Sir, what's our fire priority for today?" "The road network south and east of Bastogne," McBride replied, pointing to the map. "German armor is attempting to encircle the town. Our mission is to disrupt their timetable, force them to deploy prematurely, and prevent coordinated attacks on Bastogne itself." The men nodded, understanding the strategic importance of their role even as they recognized its likely cost. The 101st Airborne Division was moving to defend Bastogne, but needed time to establish defensive positions. The black artillerymen of the 333rd and 969th would buy that time with their expertise, and if necessary, their lives. As the meeting dispersed, Thompson approached Colonel McBride privately. "Sir, the men should know what we're facing." McBride nodded. "They deserve the truth. Tell them, Sergeant, but remind them what's at stake." Thompson gathered the men of his battery, who stood in the cold morning air, their breath forming clouds in the dawn light. These were men who had faced discrimination at home and abroad, who had been denied service at restaurants in Louisiana while German prisoners of war were seated and served. Men who fought for a country that often refused to fight for them. "Colonel McBride has designated us as a sacrifice position," Thompson said simply. "We're buying time for the 101st to set up at Bastogne. If we do our job right, a lot of those boys will make it home after this war." Private First Class Marcus Jenkins, at 19, one of the youngest members of the battery, spoke up. "So we're expendable because we're colored?" Thompson met the young man's gaze directly. "No, soldier. We're essential because we're good. The best damn artillery battalion in the European theater. That's why we got this job. The question is, are we going to do it right?" A chorus of "Yes, Sergeant," echoed through the position. Thompson nodded. "Then let's get to work. I want range calculations rechecked, full defensive preparations, and conserve ammunition. Every shell needs to count today." As the men dispersed to their duties, Thompson watched them with quiet pride. Despite everything, the segregation, the discrimination, the dehumanizing propaganda from both enemy and allies, they had become something remarkable, soldiers whose competence could not be denied, even as their humanity often was. 5 kilometers east, Obersturmführer Weber's depleted company had been reinforced and ordered to continue the advance toward Bastogne. The previous day's artillery barrage had cost him nearly a third of his strength, but fresh troops had arrived overnight, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front reassigned to this critical offensive. The Negro artillery has been reinforced by white units. Weber's battalion commander informed him during the morning briefing. That's the only explanation for their effectiveness. Weber, who had witnessed the precision fire firsthand, was not convinced. With respect, Herr Sturmbannführer, the fire coordination and accuracy has been consistent throughout. If these are indeed Negro batteries, they are exceptionally well trained. The battalion commander frowned. You sound impressed, Obersturmführer. I am evaluating the enemy realistically, sir, Weber replied carefully. Underestimating them has already cost us significant casualties. This realistic assessment represented a remarkable shift. Just 24 hours earlier, Weber had fully accepted the Reich's racial hierarchy that placed black people near the bottom. Now direct experience was forcing him to reconsider beliefs he had never previously questioned. At 0800 hours, the German advance resumed across the entire front. In the sector facing the 333rd and 969th, the attack began with a Stuka dive-bombing raid, targeting the suspected American artillery positions. Lieutenant Robinson's forward observation team watched from their concealed position as the Stukas screamed down, releasing their bombs on positions the 333rd had occupied the previous evening. They're bombing empty fields, Robinson reported via radio. Our displacement last night worked perfectly. They have no idea where we actually are. Colonel McBride acknowledged the report with satisfaction. The constant movement of gun positions, displacing at least twice during the night, was exhausting for the men, but essential for survival against superior enemy forces. As the Stukas departed, German artillery opened fire, again targeting positions that had been vacated hours earlier. The 333rd and 969th remained silent, refusing to reveal their actual locations by returning fire. Hold fire until the ground attack develops, McBride ordered. Let them commit their forces before we engage. The discipline required to withstand an artillery barrage without responding was considerable, but the men of the 333rd had learned this lesson through harsh experience. Premature counter-battery fire only revealed your position to sound-ranging teams and artillery spotters. At 0930 hours, the ground attack began. 2 battalions of German infantry, supported by a company of Panther tanks, advanced along a broad front, probing for the American positions. They moved with the confidence of troops who believed they had suppressed the enemy artillery. Lieutenant Robinson waited until the German formation was fully committed before calling in the coordinates. Target, grid, Delta, 7346, German Infantry Battalion in the open, tanks in support. Request battery fire, Chi and WP mix. Fire mission acknowledged, came the response. Battery firing, mixed ammunition. The first shells, a combination of high explosive and white phosphorus, caught the German infantry in the open, shattering their formation. The white phosphorus rounds created a billowing white smoke that burned on contact, causing panic among troops who had been advancing confidently moments before. Obersturmführer Weber, moving with the second wave, watched in dismay as the lead elements of the attack disintegrated under the precise artillery fire. The Americans had done it again, remaining silent during the preliminary bombardment, then opening fire with devastating accuracy once the German forces were exposed. "They're professionals," Weber muttered to himself as he directed his men to take cover. "Every bit as professional as our best units." The German attack faltered as supporting artillery attempted to locate and suppress the American guns, but the black artillerymen of the 333rd and 969th maintained their fire discipline, each battery firing only a few ranging rounds before delivering a precisely timed concentrated barrage, then immediately displacing to alternate positions. By midday, the German forces facing the 333rd and 969th had made only marginal gains, advancing less than a kilometer against positions that intelligence had suggested would offer minimal resistance. The delay was having strategic implications for the entire offensive. At the headquarters of the 5th Panzer Army, General Hasso von Manteuffel reviewed the disappointing progress reports with growing concern. The offensive, which required strict adherence to an ambitious timetable to succeed, was already falling behind schedule. "What is causing the delay in the southern sector?" Manteuffel demanded. His operations officer pointed to the map. "Effective American artillery fire, Herr General. 2 battalions here have slowed the advance of the entire XLV Panzer Corps." "2 battalions? Identify them." "The 333rd and 969th Field Artillery, General. Negro units." Manteuffel's expression darkened. The Wehrmacht had built its tactical doctrine around the principle of rapid breakthrough and exploitation. Artillery that could disrupt this tempo threatened the fundamental concept of the offensive. "Divert the 10th Panzer Division's artillery regiment to suppress these positions," Manteuffel ordered. "I want those guns silenced by nightfall." The decision to allocate an entire artillery regiment, over 70 guns, to counter 2 American artillery battalions reflected a dramatic reassessment of threat. Units that had been dismissed as racially inferior were now being recognized as a strategic obstacle requiring significant resources to overcome. Back at the American positions, the men of the 333rd and 969th continued their work with grim determination. Ammunition was becoming critically scarce, with some guns down to fewer than 20 rounds. The resupply convoy promised by division had never arrived, likely cut off by the German advance. Staff Sergeant Thompson moved between gun positions, redistributing the remaining ammunition to ensure each howitzer could continue firing. The men were exhausted, having been in constant action for over 30 hours, but morale remained high. "We're making a difference, aren't we, Sarge?" Private Jenkins asked as Thompson checked their ammunition status. Thompson nodded. "Every minute we hold them here is another minute for the 101st to dig in at Bastogne. Yeah, we're making a difference." At 1400 hours, the situation changed dramatically. German artillery, now reinforced to over 70 guns, began a systematic bombardment of a 2-square-kilometer area, encompassing all possible positions of the American batteries. The sheer volume of fire made it impossible to maintain the precise fire discipline that had protected the 333rd and 969th throughout the battle. "They're bracketing us," Colonel McBride observed grimly as shells began landing with increasing accuracy near their positions. "They've committed their artillery reserve." Lieutenant Chapman looked up from the Fire Direction Center. "Sir, Able Battery reports direct hits. 2 guns destroyed, several casualties." McBride nodded, his expression somber. "Order all batteries to displace immediately. Fall back to our secondary positions near Clairvaux." As the order went out, Staff Sergeant Thompson supervised the rapid displacement of his battery. The men worked with practiced efficiency, lowering the gun trails, attaching the howitzers to their prime movers, and loading essential equipment and ammunition. Private Jenkins was securing ammunition crates in the back of a 2.5-ton truck when a German artillery shell landed 30 meters away. The explosion sent fragments flying in all directions, one of which struck Jenkins in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Thompson rushed to the young soldier's side. "Medic! We need a medic here." Jenkins grimaced through the pain. "I'm all right, Sarge. Just a scratch." The wound was more than a scratch. A jagged piece of metal had penetrated his left shoulder, but it wasn't immediately life-threatening. The unit's medic, Private First Class Joseph Howard, quickly applied a field dressing. "He needs evacuation." "Staff Sergeant," Howard reported, "the fragment needs to be removed surgically." Thompson nodded. "Get him on the next truck out, and stay with him. He'll need looking after." As the wounded were loaded onto vehicles, the remaining guns continued firing, covering the withdrawal of adjacent units. The professionalism of the 333rd and 969th was evident even in retreat, maintaining fire support until the last possible moment, then executing a coordinated withdrawal to new positions. Lieutenant Robinson's observation team was among the last to withdraw, maintaining eyes on the enemy until the final American guns had displaced. As they prepared to pull back, Robinson spotted a massive German formation moving into position, at least a battalion of Panzer Grenadiers with heavy armored support. "This is Hawkeye 1-3, Robinson radioed urgently. "Large enemy force assembling at grid Echo 4692. Request immediate fire mission. All available guns." "Hawkeye 1-3, this is Thunderhead 6. Colonel McBride responded personally. "All batteries are displacing. We have one gun remaining in position with 20 rounds available. Can you make them count?" Robinson studied the German formation through his binoculars. "Affirmative, Thunderhead. I can make them count." The lone remaining howitzer of the 333rd, the last gun still in firing position, responded to Robinson's coordinates. The first round landed at the edge of the German formation, sending troops diving for cover. "Target, drop 5-0, fire for effect," Robinson adjusted. The next round landed squarely among the assembled German vehicles, destroying a half-track and sending shockwaves through the formation. Robinson continued to adjust, making each of the precious remaining shells count. With ammunition exhausted and German forces closing in, Lieutenant Robinson ordered his team to withdraw. As they moved back through the frozen forest, Robinson couldn't help but feel pride in what they had accomplished. Against all expectations, including perhaps those of their own high command, the black artillerymen had held their ground, buying critical time for the defense of Bastogne. The withdrawal to new positions was completed by nightfall, with the 333rd and 969th establishing a new defensive line 5 kilometers west of their previous positions. The toll had been significant, 8 guns lost, 37 men killed or wounded, but they had inflicted disproportionate casualties on the attacking German forces. Colonel McBride gathered his remaining officers for a status briefing as darkness fell. "Gentlemen, we've received new orders from 8 Corps. The 101st Airborne has established defensive positions around Bastogne. Our mission has changed from delay to support. We'll be reinforcing their artillery beginning tomorrow morning." The news was received with relief. The sacrifice position designation had been lifted. Their delaying action had succeeded in buying the time needed for Bastogne's defense to form. Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had been invited to the officers' briefing due to casualties among the lieutenant ranks, raised a question. "So what about ammunition resupply?" "Airdrops are being organized," McBride replied. "Until then, we'll have to rely on what we can salvage and what the 101st can share." As the meeting concluded, Thompson stepped outside the command post and looked up at the clear, star-filled sky. The temperature was dropping rapidly, approaching -20 degrees Celsius. The conditions were as much an enemy as the German forces, causing frostbite, freezing equipment, and sapping energy. Yet Thompson felt a quiet confidence. The men of the 333rd and 969th had proven themselves, not just as soldiers, but as artillerymen of exceptional skill. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it with the same professionalism and courage they had displayed since the offensive began. Across the lines, Obersturmführer Weber sat in a captured American farmhouse that now served as his company command post. The day's fighting had cost his company another 12 men, with minimal territorial gains to show for it. The offensive that had begun with such promise was becoming a grinding battle of attrition. "The Negro artillery has withdrawn to new positions near Bastogne," his intelligence officer reported. "We believe they'll be supporting the 101st Airborne Division." Weber nodded, no longer surprised by the professional conduct of the black artillerymen. "And our losses?" "Preliminary reports indicate the artillery battalion we faced has inflicted approximately 340 casualties on our regiment since yesterday morning. They've also destroyed or disabled at least 22 armored vehicles. The numbers were sobering. A single American artillery battalion, one dismissed as racially inferior, had effectively neutralized nearly a quarter of his regiment's combat power. Weber could no longer reconcile these facts with the racial ideology he had accepted unquestioningly throughout his military career. "These men are soldiers," Weber said finally. "Whatever else they may be, they are soldiers first, and formidable ones." As December 18th dawned, the Battle of the Bulge entered a new phase. The initial German breakthrough had been achieved, but the rapid exploitation required for strategic success was faltering. American resistance was stiffening across the front, with the defense of Bastogne emerging as a critical point of contention. The 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions, now integrated into the defensive perimeter around Bastogne, continued to deliver precision fire support. Their experience and skill proved invaluable to the 101st Airborne, many of whose own artillery units had been caught unprepared by the sudden German offensive. Staff Sergeant Thompson, now serving as acting first sergeant due to casualties, supervised the establishment of new gun positions on the southern approach to Bastogne. The men worked methodically despite exhaustion and the bitter cold, digging in their howitzers and calculating firing data for likely target areas. "The 101st says we're the best damn artillery they've ever worked with," Thompson told his men as they labored. "Let's prove them right." Ammunition arrived via airdrop that afternoon, pallets of 155mm shells descending by parachute into the American lines. The resupply came just in time as German probing attacks were intensifying around the Bastogne perimeter. At the German 5th Panzer Army headquarters, General Manteuffel was becoming increasingly concerned about the time lost to American delaying actions. The offensive's success depended on reaching the Meuse River before Allied reinforcements could arrive in strength. Every day of delay diminished the chance of strategic breakthrough. "The American artillery supporting Bastogne is extremely effective," his operations officer reported. "They're preventing our forces from massing for a coordinated attack." Manteuffel studied the map, noting the deployment of his artillery assets. "The Negro battalions." "Yes, General. The 333rd and 969th, now reinforced with elements of the 101st Airborne's own artillery. They're directing fire with remarkable precision, despite weather conditions that prevent effective aerial observation." The acknowledgement of the black artilleryman's skill was now matter of fact, a dramatic shift from the dismissive assessments that had characterized pre-battle intelligence. Reality had forced a reassessment that ideology could not withstand. On December 19th, the German High Command committed additional forces to the reduction of Bastogne, recognizing its critical importance to the road network in the Ardennes. The 333rd and 969th, now fully integrated into the defensive scheme, played a key role in breaking up these attacks before they could fully develop. Lieutenant Robinson, whose observation skills had proven invaluable, was positioned in a church steeple on the southern edge of Bastogne. From this vantage point, he could observe German movements at distances up to 5 kilometers, directing artillery fire with exceptional accuracy. "German armor assembling in the tree line at Grid Foxtrot 2783, Robinson reported. "I count at least 15 tanks with infantry support." Colonel McBride, now coordinating fire missions with the 101st Airborne's artillery commander, authorized an immediate response. "All batteries target Foxtrot 2783. Fire for effect, maximum rate." The combined firepower of the American artillery, over 20 guns firing in coordinated salvos, caught the German formation as it assembled for attack. The effect was devastating, with at least 7 tanks destroyed and the accompanying infantry scattered. Obersturmführer Weber, whose company was held in reserve for this attack, watched the destruction through his binoculars. The precision of the American artillery continued to astonish him, defying everything he had been taught about the capabilities of black soldiers. "How can they see us?" his company sergeant demanded. "The weather prevents air observation, and we've been careful to conceal our movements." Weber had no answer. The truth, that the Americans had established a highly effective network of forward observers with excellent vantage points, was something German intelligence had failed to identify. The assumption that black troops would lack the initiative and skill for such operations had led to a fatal blindness. As the battle for Bastogne intensified, the men of the 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions continued to distinguish themselves. Their fire support was credited with breaking up numerous German attacks, contributing significantly to the successful defense of the vital road junction. On December 22nd, a pivotal moment arrived. The German High Command, recognizing the delay at Bastogne, was jeopardizing the entire offensive, authorized a major attack involving elements of 3 panzer divisions. This would be the most determined attempt yet to capture the town. Staff Sergeant Thompson was supervising ammunition distribution when Colonel McBride called the battalion's senior NCOs to an emergency briefing. "Gentlemen, intelligence reports a major attack developing," McBride informed them. "All indications suggest the Germans will commit everything they have left in this sector." The men exchanged glances, understanding the significance. This would be the decisive moment. Either the German offensive would break through at Bastogne, opening the road to the Meuse, or it would fail with strategic consequences for the entire campaign. "Our job remains the same," McBride continued. Break up their formations before they can mass for assault. Disrupt their timetable. Force them to attack piecemeal, rather than with coordinated force. The attack began at dawn on December 23rd, with a massive artillery barrage, followed by a multi-pronged armor thrust. The German forces, desperate to maintain their offensive timetable, attacked with determination born of necessity. Lieutenant Robinson, still at his observation post in the church steeple, provided critical early warning. Multiple armored columns approaching from the south and east. They're moving fast, at least battalion strength each. The response from the American artillery was immediate and devastating. The 333rd and 969th, now fully resupplied and integrated into a comprehensive fire support plan, delivered precisely targeted fire that caught the German columns as they approached their assault positions. Obersturmführer Weber's company, now at less than 60% strength, was committed to the attack despite his reservations. As they moved toward their assault positions, the familiar sound of incoming artillery shells sent his men diving for cover. "They see everything," Weber's radio man said in disbelief as shells landed with uncanny accuracy among their vehicles. "It's like they know exactly where we'll be." The reality was both simpler and more impressive than supernatural awareness. The black artillerymen of the 333rd and 969th, through thousands of hours of training and combat experience, had developed an intuitive understanding of battlefield movement and likely assembly areas. Their forward observers, positioned at key vantage points, could predict German actions based on terrain and tactical doctrine, then direct fire with precision that seemed impossible. Throughout the day, the German attack tried repeatedly to gain momentum, only to be disrupted by artillery fire before it could mass sufficient combat power. By nightfall, it was clear the attack had failed. The German forces had suffered heavy casualties, over 600 men and 31 tanks in this sector alone, without achieving their objectives. On December 24th, as both sides paused to observe Christmas Eve according to the informal customs of war, Colonel McBride received a communication from the commanding general of the 101st Airborne Division. It was a formal commendation for the 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions, acknowledging their outstanding performance and critical contribution to the defense of Bastogne. McBride gathered the men to share the commendation. "I'll be direct, gentlemen. When this offensive began, many questioned whether Negro artillery units could stand against the best the Wehrmacht had to offer. You've answered that question definitively." Staff Sergeant Thompson, standing at the back of the assembled men, felt a complex mixture of pride, vindication, and lingering anger. They had proven themselves beyond any doubt, but the fact that they had needed to prove themselves at all reflected the prejudice they continued to face, even within their own army. "The General also informs me," McBride continued, "that elements of Patton's Third Army have broken through to our position. The siege of Bastogne is effectively over. The German offensive has culminated without achieving its objectives." A cheer went up from the assembled men, a rare display of emotion from soldiers who had maintained professional composure through the most challenging circumstances. As the men dispersed, Thompson remained behind to speak with Colonel McBride privately. "Sir, what happens now, after what we've done here?" McBride understood the question behind the question. Would the performance of the black artillery units change anything about how they were perceived, how they were treated? "I can't promise the world will change overnight, Thompson," McBride replied honestly. "But I can tell you this. Every white soldier who fought alongside you will never see black troops the same way again. And neither will the Germans who faced you." Across the lines, Obersturmführer Weber sat in a medical aid station, his left arm bandaged where an artillery fragment had struck him during the failed attack. Around him were dozens of wounded German soldiers. The human cost of an offensive that had promised quick victory, but delivered bloody stalemate. "The Negro artillerymen," a wounded tank commander in the adjacent bed commented. "They're the ones who stopped us, aren't they?" Weber nodded. "They're soldiers, better artillerymen than most of ours." The tank commander was silent for a moment. "They can't be what we were told they were then. The Reich's racial theories are wrong," Weber finished simply, "at least about this." It was a small acknowledgement, spoken in the quiet of a field hospital rather than announced to the world. But it represented something profound, the beginning of a crack in the foundation of a belief system that had helped drive Europe into the abyss of war. By December 26th, the strategic situation had changed dramatically. Hitler's offensive, which had required both surprise and rapid execution to succeed, had been fatally delayed. American reinforcements were arriving in strength, and the weather was clearing, allowing Allied air power to savage German formations caught in the open. The 333rd and 969th Field Artillery Battalions continued to support operations as the Allied counterattack began, helping to reduce the bulge the German offensive had created in American lines. Their performance throughout the battle had established a reputation that transcended the color line. They were now sought after as fire support by white infantry units that would have rejected them weeks earlier. In January 1945, as the last German forces were pushed back to their start lines, preliminary casualty figures became available. The German offensive had cost them over 100 Eisenhower casualties, including more than 20 Eisenhower killed and 30 Eisenhower missing or captured. It represented a strategic disaster from which the Wehrmacht would never recover. Staff Sergeant Thompson, reviewing these figures in stars and stripes, felt no triumph, only a somber recognition of war's cost. Yet he also understood that he and his men had played a crucial role in turning Hitler's last gamble into a decisive defeat. "The Germans said we were half-apes," Private Jenkins commented, his wounded shoulder now healing. "Turns out we're full artillerymen." Thompson allowed himself a rare smile. "The best damn artillery in the European theater. Don't you forget it." The Battle of the Bulge marked a turning point, not just in the war, but in the long struggle for recognition and respect by Black American servicemen. Their performance under the most challenging conditions had made it impossible to maintain the fiction of racial inferiority that had been used to justify segregation and discrimination. In the decades that followed, veterans of the 333rd and 969th would be among those who returned home determined to continue their fight for equality. Having proven themselves on the battlefield against both external enemies and internal prejudice, they brought the same determination to the civil rights struggles of the 1950s and 1960s. The legacy of the black artillerymen who helped turn the tide at Bastogne would be measured not just in the battles they won, but in the barriers they broke, demonstrating through skill, courage, and professionalism that competence knows no color, and that prejudice is not just morally wrong but practically foolish. For the Wehrmacht, the lesson came too late. Their adherence to racial ideology had led them to fatally underestimate their opponents, contributing to a defeat that cost them not just position and prestige, but the lives of over 20 Wowzaras of their finest soldiers in the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.